Every story we tell is a journey, a thrilling adventure that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community come together from all around the world. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Tomorrow, we have a special story just for you. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. See you on the next adventure. The moment he realized he messed up badly. Jake Miller had always been the center of attention. At just 24, he had built his entire brand around confidence, risk-taking, and viral moments. With millions of followers hanging on to his every move, Jake wasn't just another tourist, he was an entertainer. And today, he had his sights set on Buckingham Palace. Stepping into the bustling square, Jake adjusted his designer tracksuit and brushed a hand through his perfectly styled hair. His sneakers, fresh out of the box, crunched against the pavement as he walked. The late afternoon sun glinted off his gold chain and high-end watch, reflecting in the lenses of the tourists' cameras. Unlike them, Jake wasn't here to admire history, he was here to make history. His phone was already in his hand, the camera rolling. "Alright, guys, you're not gonna believe what I'm about to do," he said into the lens, flashing a cocky grin. The comments were already pouring in, the view count climbing by the second. He thrived off this energy. This was what he lived for. In the distance, the royal guards stood in perfect formation, statuesque and unwavering. Their crisp red uniforms and tall black hats made them instantly recognizable, a symbol of tradition that had endured for centuries. But to Jake, they weren't guardians of the monarchy, they were props in his next viral stunt. He strolled toward the nearest guard, weaving through the crowd with the swagger of someone who had never been told no. People instinctively stepped aside, some glancing at him curiously, others frowning in disapproval. He didn't care. He had done wilder things before. What was the worst that could happen? Standing just a few feet from Sergeant Ethan Walker, Jake smirked. The guard was a tower of discipline, 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, his gaze locked forward, completely unfazed by the chaos around him. A lesser man might have flinched at the approaching influencer, but Sergeant Walker remained as still as stone. Jake turned back to his phone, grinning. "This guy thinks he's untouchable," he whispered to his audience. "Let's test that, shall we?" The crowd murmured. Some pulled out their phones, sensing something was about to unfold. But Jake wasn't paying attention to them. He was locked in, ready to do what no one else had dared. And in that moment, he had no idea just how badly this would end. The moment Jake Miller stepped past the invisible line of respect, the energy in the crowd shifted. What had started as mild curiosity quickly turned into uneasy anticipation. He was too close now, standing just inches away from Sergeant Ethan Walker, his phone still rolling, his smirk never fading. "Come on, man," Jake whispered, his voice laced with cocky amusement. "Give me something." Ethan, of course, didn't move. His posture remained flawless, back straight, hands at his sides, eyes locked forward. He had stood through heat waves, pouring rain, and the relentless stares of thousands of tourists. A guy like Jake? Just another distraction. But Jake wasn't the type to accept silence as an answer. He leaned in slightly, tilting his head as if inspecting a statue. Then, with exaggerated movements, he waved a hand in front of the guard's face, testing for even the slightest reaction. Nothing. The tension in the air grew thicker. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, while others raised their phones, eager to catch what was about to unfold. Jake chuckled under his breath. All right, I get it. Tough guy." He took a half-step closer. People in the crowd exchanged glances. They had all seen tourists push the limits before: silly faces, fake salutes, even awkward attempts at making the guards laugh. But this was different. There was something too aggressive about Jake's approach, too deliberate. It wasn't curiosity, it was a challenge. Then, out of nowhere, Jake clapped his hands together in front of Ethan's face. Loud. Sharp. The sound cracked through the air, startling even some of the bystanders. But not Ethan. Not a flinch. Not a blink. The crowd fell silent. No one was laughing anymore. Jake, however, grinned. This was exactly what he wanted. The tension. The stares. The cameras rolling. This was his moment. "You guys see this?" he said, turning the camera toward himself. "Dude is like a robot." Then, he did something no one expected. With a smirk, he took one final step forward, so close now that barely an inch separated them. His breath practically brushed against Ethan's face. And then, in one sharp burst, he shouted at the top of his lungs. The sound was jarring, cutting through the square like a gunshot. Even the most distracted tourists turned their heads. And for the first time, the tension wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake Miller stood there, his breath heavy, his heart pounding in his chest. The royal guard remained motionless, unshaken, his gaze locked straight ahead. But the energy in the air had shifted. The laughter from the crowd had disappeared. A heavy silence blanketed the square. Jake smirked, glancing at his phone. "Wow," he muttered, shaking his head. "Nothing? Seriously?" He turned to the crowd, lifting his arms as if inviting them in on the joke. "This guy's unreal." But he wasn't laughing. Something about the way people were looking at him now unsettled him. Their expressions weren't amused anymore. Some were annoyed, others disappointed, and a few just stared, waiting, like they knew something he didn't. Jake wasn't used to that feeling. He was always in control, always dictating the scene. And right now, this moment was slipping away from him. He needed to take it further. Just standing there wasn't enough. He turned back toward Sergeant Ethan Walker. The guard remained unmoved, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. It was infuriating. Jake needed a reaction, any reaction. That's what the video needed. That's what his audience craved. And so, without hesitation, he reached out and did the unthinkable. He poked the guard's shoulder. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. For the briefest second, time seemed to freeze. The tension in the air coiled so tight it could snap. No one moved. No one spoke. Jake grinned. "Come on, bro," he said under his breath. "Give me someth." Then it happened. A single, precise step. It was fast, too fast for Jake to even process. One moment, the guard was still as stone. The next, he had shifted with a speed and power that sent Jake stumbling back. And before he could react, before he could even understand, there was an impact. Hard. Jake's feet left the ground, his body twisting in the air before slamming onto the cold stone pavement. His phone skidded across the ground, still recording. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in laughter, but in stunned, breathless silence. For the first time in his life, Jake wasn't the one in control. And for the first time, he felt what it was like to be truly powerless. Jake hit the ground hard. The cold stone sent a shock through his body, knocking the breath from his lungs. For a moment, he just lay there, stunned, his mind struggling to process what had happened. 1 second, he was standing tall, smirking at the camera. The next, he was sprawled across the pavement like a discarded prop in his own video. His ears rang. The world felt muted, distant, except for one sound. A dull thud echoed in his mind, over and over again. The sound of his own body hitting the ground. Then came the whispers. A ripple spread through the crowd, soft at first, then growing louder. Someone gasped. Another stifled a chuckle. A few phones lowered as people simply stared, their eyes flicking between Jake and the royal guard who had sent him crashing down. Sergeant Ethan Walker, however, had not moved. He remained exactly as he had been before. Posture rigid. Hands at his sides. Eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't gloat. He didn't acknowledge Jake's existence at all. And somehow, that was worse than if he had. Jake pushed himself up, his palms scraping against the rough pavement. His expensive watch had a deep scratch across the face. His phone, lying a few feet away, was still recording. The comments, thousands of them, were already flooding in. "Bro just got humbled in real time. That's gotta be the fastest karma I've ever seen. Tell me you don't respect the royal guard without telling me." His stomach twisted. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had expected laughter, maybe some applause. A moment of fun, a viral joke. But instead, they were laughing at him. He looked around. No one reached out to help. No one asked if he was okay. They just watched. Some still recording, others shaking their heads. Jake clenched his jaw, forcing himself to his feet. His legs felt unsteady. His pride felt shattered. He turned back toward the guard, anger bubbling up inside him, but the moment he opened his mouth, nothing. Ethan hadn't even glanced his way. Jake wasn't just ignored. He was dismissed. And as the cameras continued rolling, as the internet prepared to make him its next great joke, one horrible realization sank in. This moment would never go away. Jake Miller stood there, his fists clenched, his face burning with humiliation. He had never felt so small, so powerless. The laughter was growing now, not loud, but sharp. A few tourists whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Some chuckled under their breath. Others just stared, watching him like he was part of a performance, an attraction they hadn't expected to witness. And yet, the only person who wasn't watching him was the one who had put him on the ground. Sergeant Ethan Walker remained motionless. He didn't smirk. He didn't acknowledge what had happened. He didn't need to. The moment was over for him the second Jake hit the ground. His duty continued. His posture was still perfect, his face still unreadable, his eyes locked straight ahead. Jake swallowed hard. His entire body ached, not just from the fall, but from the crushing weight of embarrassment. He could feel the eyes on him, could hear the snickers, could sense the phones capturing every miserable second. And he knew that by the time he made it back to his hotel, his downfall would already be everywhere. Still, he couldn't just stand there. Without another word, he bent down, grabbed his phone, and turned away. He moved quickly, his steps stiff, his heart pounding. He refused to look back. If he did, if he saw another person smirking, another camera pointed at him, he might just break. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, the murmurs began again. People were already sharing the video. The headlines were writing themselves. Tourist tries to provoke royal guard, immediately regrets it. News outlets would cover it. Commentators would dissect it. Memes would flood the internet. This wasn't just a moment, it was history. And Jake? He was just another example. Another name in a long list of people who had underestimated the tradition, the discipline, the unwavering presence of the Royal Guard. By the next morning, his face was everywhere. His name trended worldwide. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. But it didn't matter. He had already lost. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, Sergeant Ethan Walker remained at his post, standing as his predecessors had for generations. Unshaken. Unbothered. Because for him, nothing had changed. But for Jake, everything had. What do you think about this moment? Was it a well-deserved lesson or just an unfortunate mistake? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed something like this in real life? Let's talk about it.